This really isn't a fair comparison at all, but I'm going to do it anyway. Stay with me and I will tell you why I'm doing this. This is the Nikon D800 and I have the 24-70 f2.8 lens on it. And I carried a similar body, the D810, which is filming me now, along with some additional gear around on a week-long trip to Yellowstone National Park recently. This is a pretty common walking around setup. More and more non-professional photographers are making the jump from cropped sensor to full frame because there are so many more full frame bodies available and people tend to think that their photography will be better with it. So let's weigh it on my super exact kitchen scale here. 4 pounds, 6 ounces. Lots of flexibility here, but that's quite a bit of weight. Right now, this setup costs well over $4,000. So here I have the Nikon D500 with a much smaller prime lens, the older 24mm f2.8D. Another solid option for photography lovers out there. It's a high-end cropped sensor body made just about the lightest that it can be with a prime lens. 2 pounds, 9 ounces, and a little bit. Okay, definitely lighter and easier to carry, but with less flexibility with the prime lens. Right now it'll cost you over $2,000. And that's easier to swallow, but it's still a lot of money. Now this is the Canon Rebel SL2 / EOS 200D with a 24mm pancake prime lens on it. 1 pound, 6 ounces. This setup cost you about $700. Okay, here's why I'm doing this. I know a lot of you out there are thinking that this is a completely ridiculous exercise and that a person who would be looking at a Canon SL2 wouldn't also be looking at a Nikon D810. But in my time as SnapChick, I've answered thousands of questions from people wanting to purchase their first or next DSLR, and I'm here to tell you that many people are unsure of what direction to take, and they are looking at all of the options out there. Plus, these are setups that I have on my shelf and I could grab on any given weekend for a trip to the Grand Canyon or to the museum, or even for a full vacation to Yellowstone National Park. I like to mix it up with cameras from different brands, up and down the line. I don't think they're all interchangeable. I would say that there is a time and a place for something like the heavier full frame body with the zoom lens. But boy, do I like to go out with something really compact and lightweight, like the D500 with a prime lens, or even smaller, like the SL2 and a pancake prime lens. If I can spend a lot less money, still get great results, and be more comfortable on my adventures, I'd love to be able to use this and be able to recommend it to you all out there that just want to take great photos but don't necessarily know if they want to spend thousands of dollars. So, check your camera snobbery at the door and let's get to the review. I have had the SL2 for about a month now and I love it. There, that's it. My review's over. Yes, you can use this camera and get great results. Just kidding, I'm not really done. Stick around. I will tell you what I do love about this camera and what I don't. Plus, I'll share lots of photos that I've taken with it because I have taken a lot of photos and video. And then I'll tell you how you can see a gallery of the images that I've taken with this little guy. Let's go through a few of the important specs real quick, and then we'll get into my experience with the camera and how all those specifications play together, and why you may or may not want this camera. The SL2 is Canon's smallest DSLR, and it has a cropped sensor. Canon's crop factor is 1.6x. This guy has 24 megapixels, and it will shoot photos at up to 5 frames per second. It will also shoot video at up to 1080p at 60 frames per second. Plus, it does have wireless capability. Okay, now that we have some of those specifications all listed out, let's talk about how they all work together. Because specifications are fine, but they don't really mean anything until you see how the whole camera functions, or doesn't function. But don't worry, it does. One more piece of business before I delve into that. This guy is available in a kit with an 18 to 55 millimeter variable aperture lens, but I purchased the body only, and I've been using my 2 Canon prime lenses on it, the 24 millimeter f2.8 pancake and the 40 millimeter f2.8 pancake. I've been using these 2 lenses on my other Canon body, the Rebel T4i, for some time now, and I've been really happy with them. That leads me to why I purchased this body. I wanted to update my Canon body. Actually, I was attracted to the SL1 years ago when it came out because of the size, but I had the T4i and a whole slew of Nikon bodies, so I couldn't quite justify the purchase. When the SL2 came out, it seemed like the right time to get rid of the T4i and welcome the SL2 into the family. And I chose to use the primes because I love how small the form factor is of the pancake primes and how they fit into my vision of grabbing the SL2 on the go. Plus, they open up to wide apertures, and prime lenses are notoriously crisp and clear. So anyway, I mentioned that the crop factor a moment ago was 1.6x, and that means that these lenses give me effective fields of view of 38 millimeters and 64 millimeters. For me, those have been great for walking around, photographing what comes my way, and I've also been in the studio for portraits. Okay, on to how the camera works. Let's start with the size, since it is a major benefit of this camera and a reason that you may choose this body over others in the Canon lineup. It is seriously small, and it's totally usable too. Here it is in my hands. I have fairly large hands for a gal, but I have no problem handling it. Raymond also uses it. He has giant hands, but he has no issues using the camera. It is definitely well designed to be easy to handle. The grip is extra deep, which goes a long way. And along with being small, it's lightweight. It's a breeze to toss into my backpack or just hang around my neck for a day of running around. Now for image quality. The perception may be that this tiny little camera isn't going to give you a great image, but that's not true. Image quality, it's what you would expect from a new DSLR. And by that I mean that it's great. I took the SL2 and my Nikon D500 here to Petrified Forest National Park on a beautiful day a couple of weeks ago, and I used them both. Here are photos taken with both. Can you tell which is which? Because I'll bet not. I set the cameras similarly and used similar lenses. I did notice that the out-of-the-box image on the D500 has slightly more contrast and saturation, but a quick adjustment to the picture style in the SL2 or when you're editing, and you get the same pop. And they're both crisp images with good dynamic range. You do have some noise introduced into your image at the higher ISO sensitivities, but that's to be expected. I put my best model into the studio to show you how the SL2 performs. Here's an image taken at the camera's base ISO of 100. I'll zoom in. To me, it's a foregone conclusion that an image taken at base ISO with a new DSLR will be crisp. But higher ISO is where you're going to start to see differences. Here is the same setup, making a big jump to ISO 800. Zooming in again, this is where I would expect to see some noise, and I do see some in the parts that are more flatly colored. And jumping to an image zoomed in at the top native ISO of 25,600, yeah, it's real noisy. Certainly to be expected, and not what you would choose for a portrait, but if your choice is to either get the shot with this level of noise or not get the shot at all, I'm going for the noisy shot. And the amount of noise that you find acceptable is certainly personal preference, and for me it depends on the situation. But I found that for most practical purposes, I was definitely comfortable with images taken up through ISO 800, and I may even go higher really. Just take a look at this photo of me from a recent shoot with the SL2 in the studio. I wasn't using any studio lighting, so the ISO was increased. This one was taken at ISO 800. Zooming in, the noise isn't objectionable to me at all. So looking at high ISO images can give you an idea of what the camera can do. But one thing that I always test out is how the camera autofocuses in low light situations. I've used too many cameras that are able to take clear photos at the higher ISO sensitivities, but they have trouble autofocusing in that low light. And I found that the SL2 doesn't have trouble with this. It doesn't hunt around, it just snaps right into focus. Before I used it, I thought that if the SL2 were to have a weakness, it would be this. So this was a really pleasant surprise. I mean, with any camera, you will come to a point of darkness where the camera will have trouble, but at the museum, in the photo shoot in my studio where it was pretty dim lighting, I didn't have any issues. The SL2 is rated to shoot at up to 5 frames per second, but that statistic is always a little misleading to me. On any camera, if you want to use autofocus or if you're in low light conditions, it's going to be a little slower. Also, the buffer will fill up if you just mash the shutter release button down and hold it there. The number of frames per second will also depend on the type of image you're recording. And if you're shooting in RAW, your buffer will fill up more quickly. If you're shooting in JPEG, it'll take longer for the buffer to slow you down. Now, it'll be different on different cameras, but let's try a really scientific test to see how the SL2 does with that. I've got the camera set to continuous shooting and continuous autofocus. Plus, I'm shooting in RAW. This will give us kind of the worst case scenario. This is, again, something that's going to be personal preference. If you want the very fastest frames per second you can, this probably isn't the camera for you. You can spend a lot more and get that, but this is respectable. And if you practice with whatever action you're needing continuous shooting for, you'll find that you won't necessarily need the very fastest camera. You just need that extra practice. Speaking of shooting action, you have options to have the camera choose your settings for you, like for action or for portraits or for landscapes. You have a mode dial at the top here where you tell the SL2 just how much you want it to figure out for you. This is really handy, especially if you're just getting started with photography or you just don't want to have to know all the details of how to set up your camera for different situations. However, if you do want to know those details, you can shoot with varying amounts of control, all the way to fully manual, where you choose absolutely everything. All right, let's move on to video. You can record video at up to 1080p at 60 frames per second. I realize that it is lacking 4K capability, but I don't really use that at this point, so it doesn't bother me. I'm more interested that it will shoot in 1080p at 24 frames per second for a more cinematic effect. The really earth-shattering thing for me, though, is the autofocus during video. The continuous autofocus works, and it's super quiet. I have used DSLRs for filming in the studio for years, but I rarely use them outside of the studio because of the awful autofocus capability and noise. Not so with this camera. It's amazing. Check it out. I can move around and you can see the autofocus point following me and the camera quickly focusing on me. Which is another thing. It is really nice to be able to see myself and where the camera is focusing with the flip-out LCD screen. And that brings me to the general usability of the camera. The flip-out screen can be helpful for things like self-portraits, but it is also great for high or low angle shots when using live view. Also, I could flip it around and close it up, which I really like for when I just toss the camera into my bag or when I'm out hiking to protect the screen. On the same note of general usability, even though the body doesn't have a ton of buttons and dials, I was able to make settings changes on the fly with the info screen. I can scroll through and make changes here or use the touchscreen. The idea for me with this camera isn't so much to be fiddling with settings every few shots. I'd rather set it and forget it. But I do like that I can make quick changes when I want to. The SL2 has Wi-Fi with NFC and Bluetooth, which is something that I don't use all that often. It's not really a game changer for me, but it is really handy to have. Canon has an app for your mobile device called Camera Connect where you can transfer images or control the camera remotely. I've done both. It was really easy to set up. Transferring an image or two out in the field wirelessly so that I can post something for you guys on social media is great. It means that I don't need to have my computer with me all the time. I also used this in my studio for some self-portraits. I was able to adjust the camera settings in the app and then trigger the shutter with my phone. I could also see myself and focus on myself with the phone. Getting near the end here, let's talk about battery life. It is surprisingly good, which is good because I haven't been able to get my hands on a second battery. Not because they aren't out there, but because I couldn't get it locally or on Amazon Prime, and I'm impatient and I want it now rather than waiting a few days for shipping. It is a new battery type, so it's not as widely available. Anyway, I never ran out of battery life, though I do always charge my batteries when I'm not using them. Okay, so I realized that I've gone through and told you about all of these good things about this camera. I know I sound like a sales pitch, and I know it's more fun to hear about the bad stuff. Unfortunately, I just don't have much. I do have 3 gripes. 1, You can set ISO auto on the camera, where the camera will choose an appropriate ISO sensitivity for you. You can set the maximum ISO that you want the camera to choose, which is great, but you can't set the minimum shutter speed. This is something that I have grown accustomed to on my other cameras, and I did find the camera wanting to use a shutter speed that was really too slow for handheld shooting or action from time to time. I just had to keep an eye on it, and if I was that concerned, either I used shutter priority or manual mode. It would be nice to be able to set the minimum shutter speed associated with auto ISO. Gripe number 2. The camera has a pop-up flash, which I love because every once in a while it comes in handy. However, there's no way I've found to set manual output. The camera figures out how much flash it thinks you need, rather than allowing the user to determine what effect they want. That's annoying to me, and as a result, I will use the pop-up even more rarely than I already do. Gripe number 3 is completely personal preference. I am still not a fan of how you change autofocus area on Canon cameras. I've been a Nikon shooter for a long time. I've used many other camera brands, and it does always frustrate me a little bit when I have to press a button and then just turn the dial to scroll through the autofocus areas on a Canon. Again though, totally a personal choice. And it certainly hasn't prevented me from picking this thing up every time I wanted to take a photo. Okay everyone, here's my assessment. I like this camera. It simply works, and it's a fantastic option for people who want to be able to take incredible photos to print or post online, but don't want that hefty price tag that can come with a DSLR setup. This camera, it may not be super sexy, doesn't have any special standout features, with the exception of size, because that is something that makes this camera attractive to me, but it just gets the job done. You can take varying amounts of control, you have all the image that you could want for using straight out of the camera, or going into editing software and playing around with it. I used it around town, outdoors, in the studio, and I never found it lacking. Rather, I found it easy to use and capable. Plus, it's not only the least expensive of the setups that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, it's one of the least expensive DSLRs out there. And that extra money that you may have spent on a more expensive body can be spent on outings with the camera, or maybe a nice lens or two. There's nothing stopping you from slapping the big lenses on here for those times when you want more flexibility. So if you're looking for a small camera or a relatively inexpensive camera, but you want something that is going to allow you to create beautiful images, this may be the one for you. If you really want something big and heavy, or something that will shoot super fast with lots of frames per second, maybe you look higher up the Canon line. I have taken a whole ton of photos with this camera since I received it. I put together a gallery of images for my members. So if you are a SnapChick VIP or a Patreon Glacier or Beyond patron, follow the link in the description below. You'll be able to log in and see the gallery. For everyone else, if you follow that link, you can learn more about supporting my mission as a VIP or a patron. Thanks for watching, everyone. I will be back soon with more videos about cameras and photography, including a body tour and a complete menu walkthrough of the SL2. Subscribe to my channel and follow me on social media to see it all.